The morning sun streamed through the airport's giant windows as a young woman rushed through the terminal, pulling a small carry-on suitcase behind her. She was running late for her flight to San Francisco, and her casual outfit, worn jeans, comfortable sneakers, and an oversized black hoodie, made her blend in with the crowd of economy passengers hurrying to their gates. What wasn't obvious to anyone was that this woman, Maya Patel, had just closed a major deal that morning, selling her AI software company's latest innovation to one of the biggest tech firms in Silicon Valley. The transaction had made her company worth billions, but she hadn't had time to change out of the clothes she'd worn during her all-night coding session. Reaching the first-class counter, Maya handed over her ticket. The gate agent did a double take, looking at her casual attire, but quickly checked her in with professional courtesy. As she walked down the jet bridge, Maya could feel the exhaustion from her sleepless night catching up with her. Inside the plane, she found her first-class seat, 2A, by the window. The leather seat felt like heaven after her stressful morning, and she closed her eyes for a moment, looking forward to the peaceful 6-hour flight ahead. Other first-class passengers in their business suits and designer clothes filtered in, some giving her curious glances. The peace was short-lived. During the pre-flight checks, Captain Robert Stevens, a tall man with graying hair and a perfectly pressed uniform, walked through the first-class cabin. He stopped abruptly at Maya's seat, his eyes narrowing as he took in her appearance. The corners of his mouth turned down in obvious disapproval. "Excuse me," he called out loudly to a flight attendant, making sure other passengers could hear. "I think we might have a situation here. Did someone get lost on their way to economy?" His voice dripped with condescension as he gestured toward Maya. The flight attendant, a kind-faced woman in her 40s, approached hesitantly. "Is there a problem, Captain?" "Well," he continued, still speaking loudly enough for the entire first-class cabin to hear, "I was just wondering if we're maintaining our standards these days. First class used to mean something." He shot another disapproving look at Maya's hoodie. Maya's cheeks burned with embarrassment as other passengers turned to stare. Some looked uncomfortable, others smirked, and a few even nodded in agreement with the captain. She gripped her armrest tightly, taking deep breaths to stay calm. The startup world had taught her to pick her battles wisely, and making a scene wouldn't help anyone. The flight attendant checked Maya's ticket and confirmed she was in the correct seat, but the captain just huffed and walked away, muttering something about keeping up appearances loud enough for everyone to hear. As the remaining passengers boarded, Maya could feel curious eyes on her. She pulled out her phone, pretending to be busy while fighting back tears of humiliation. She'd faced plenty of prejudice in the tech world as a young female entrepreneur, but this public shaming felt different. More personal, more painful. Little did Captain Stevens know that the woman he'd just humiliated had enough resources to buy his entire airline several times over. As Maya sat there, her mind wasn't focused on revenge, but rather on how someone's position of authority could make them feel entitled to judge others based on appearances alone. She pulled her hoodie tighter around herself, knowing this flight was going to feel much longer than 6 hours. The flight had barely taken off when Captain Stevens' voice crackled through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard. Just a friendly reminder that first class has certain standards we like to maintain. We want everyone to feel they're getting the luxury experience they paid for." His emphasis on the word paid made Maya sink deeper into her seat. A businessman across the aisle glanced at her hoodie and snickered. The woman next to him whispered something, and they both laughed quietly. Maya pulled out her laptop, trying to focus on work instead of the judgmental looks around her. The kind flight attendant from earlier, whose name tag read Mrs. Kumar, approached with a warm smile. "Would you like something to drink?" she asked softly. Just as Maya was about to answer, the captain emerged from the cockpit for what he called a routine cabin check. He stopped right by Maya's seat again, speaking loudly to Mrs. Kumar. "Remember when first class meant people dressed for the occasion? These days, It seems like anyone can wander in wearing whatever they picked up off their bedroom floor. His words hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Maya's hands trembled slightly as she accepted her water from Mrs. Kumar. She hadn't felt this small since her early days pitching to investors who dismissed her because of her age and appearance. Back then, she'd worn suits to fit in, but after succeeding on her own terms, she'd promised herself never to change who she was for others again. The flight continued, and so did the captain's subtle jabs. During turbulence announcements, he'd add unnecessary comments about maintaining proper decorum in first class. Each time he walked through the cabin, he'd make a show of looking disapprovingly at Maya's seat. A young flight attendant who seemed new to the job approached Maya quietly during a quiet moment. "I'm so sorry about this," she whispered, quickly moving away before the captain could notice. The small gesture of kindness almost made Maya tear up again, but this time from gratitude. 3 hours into the flight, Maya needed to use the restroom. As she walked down the aisle, she overheard snippets of conversations. Standards these days, just because they have money, probably won some contest. Each word felt like a tiny needle pricking her skin. Returning to her seat, she found Captain Stevens standing there, supposedly checking something on the overhead compartment. "Oh," he said loudly, "I thought maybe you found your way to the economy section where you might feel more comfortable." Several passengers chuckled. Maya straightened her spine and looked him directly in the eye. "I'm exactly where I belong," she said quietly, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The captain's smug smile faltered for just a moment before he turned away. As she sat back down, Maya opened her phone's notes app and began typing. Not a complaint. She was thinking bigger. Much bigger. She'd built her company by solving problems, by turning obstacles into opportunities. And right now, she was formulating a plan that would change not just this airline, but the entire industry's culture. Mrs. Kumar passed by again, discreetly offering Maya an extra cookie with her coffee. "Not everyone here agrees with him," she whispered, giving a subtle but encouraging smile. Maya thanked her, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who'd ever been judged by their appearance rather than their character. The remaining hours felt endless, but Maya used the time productively. Between the captain's pointed announcements and the whispered judgments of fellow passengers, she researched the airline's financial status, stock prices, and corporate structure. By the time the plane began its descent into San Francisco, she had the beginnings of a plan that would shock everyone on board, especially Captain Stevens. As the plane touched down in San Francisco, Maya felt a strange sense of calm replace the hurt and anger she experienced during the flight. While other passengers rushed to grab their bags, she remained seated, watching Captain Stevens stride past her one last time with his nose in the air. The moment she stepped off the plane, she pulled out her phone and called her closest friend and business partner, Raj. "You won't believe what just happened," she began, walking through the terminal. As she described the humiliating experience, Raj interrupted her mid-sentence. "Wait, isn't that Regional Airways? The one that's been all over the business news?" His voice carried a hint of excitement that made Maya stop walking. "Their stock has been dropping like crazy. There were rumors about bankruptcy last week." Maya found a quiet corner in the airport and opened her laptop. Sure enough, Regional Airways stock had plummeted 60% in the last month. Years of poor management, outdated systems, and declining customer service had taken their toll. The airline that had once been an industry leader was now struggling to stay afloat. "Send me everything you can find about their financial situation," Maya told Raj. "And get the investment team together for an emergency meeting in an hour." She could hear him typing furiously on the other end. While waiting for her ride, Maya remembered something her grandmother used to say. "When someone shows you their worst, show them your best." Her grandmother had started with a small grocery store and built it into a successful chain, all while facing constant discrimination. She never let it break her spirit. Instead, She used it as fuel to create positive change. The video call with her investment team was intense. "Look," Maya explained, pacing in her hotel room. "This isn't just about revenge. Regional Airways has potential. Their routes are valuable. Their crews are mostly good people. And with proper management and modern technology, we could transform it." Her team stared back at her through the screen, a mix of concern and intrigue on their faces. "The numbers actually make sense," said their financial advisor, pushing up his glasses as he reviewed the data. "Their stock is severely undervalued. With your tech expertise and vision for customer service, we could revolutionize how airlines operate." Over the next few hours, Maya's hotel room transformed into a command center. Takeout containers piled up as her team worked remotely, crunching numbers and developing strategies. They discovered that many of Regional's problems stemmed from outdated systems and a toxic corporate culture that started at the top. "We could integrate our AI software for better booking systems," suggested one team member. "Implement real-time customer feedback, personalized service algorithms." The possibilities were endless. By sunset, Maya stood at her hotel window, watching planes take off and land at Estavo. She thought about Mrs. Kumar and the young flight attendant who had shown her kindness. They deserved better leadership. All the employees did. Her phone buzzed with a message from her legal team. They had found a way to quietly acquire shares without alerting the market. It would take careful planning and precise timing, but it was possible. Maya took a deep breath and typed back, "Start the process." That night, as she prepared for bed, Maya caught her reflection in the mirror. She was still wearing the same hoodie that had sparked all this. Running her fingers over its soft fabric, she smiled. This piece of clothing that Captain Stevens had judged her for would become a symbol of the biggest change in his career. Her phone lit up with another message. The first round of stock purchases had been completed successfully. Maya felt a flutter of excitement in her stomach. Not the nervous kind she'd felt on the plane, but the familiar thrill of starting something big, something meaningful. Before going to sleep, she made one final call to Raj. "Make sure everyone knows this stays completely quiet," she said. "I want this to be the biggest surprise Regional Airways has ever had." As she drifted off to sleep, Maya wasn't thinking about getting back at one arrogant pilot anymore. She was dreaming about transforming an entire industry, one flight at a time. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Maya barely left her hotel room, surrounded by laptops, tablets, and empty coffee cups. Her team had set up a virtual war room, coordinating their moves with the precision of a chess grandmaster. "We've managed to buy 5% of the shares through different channels," Raj reported during their morning video call. He looked tired but excited, his usual neat appearance slightly rumpled from working through the night. "Nobody's noticed the pattern yet." Maya nodded, taking a sip from her fourth coffee of the day. The plan was working perfectly. They were buying small amounts of shares through various investment firms, keeping each purchase just below the threshold that would require public reporting. Her phone buzzed with a news alert. Regional Airways stock had dropped another 2% after a prominent investor publicly criticized their outdated booking system. Maya couldn't help but smile. That outdated system was exactly what her company specialized in fixing. Around noon, she got an unexpected call from Mrs. Kumar, the kind flight attendant from her horrible flight. "I hope you don't mind," Mrs. Kumar said hesitantly, "but I found your contact through your company's website. I wanted to apologize again for how you were treated." The call gave Maya an idea. "Actually, I'd love to hear more about your experience working for Regional," she said, grabbing her notebook. For the next hour, Mrs. Kumar shared invaluable insights about the airline's internal culture, its problems, and most importantly, its potential. "Most of us really care about our passengers," Mrs. Kumar explained. "But the management, they're stuck in the past. They don't listen to our suggestions, don't invest in training. Even our uniforms are outdated and uncomfortable." Maya took detailed notes. Every problem Mrs. Kumar mentioned was an opportunity for improvement. By the end of the call, she had 3 pages filled with ideas for transforming the airline's culture from the ground up. That evening, during the team's strategy meeting, Maya's financial advisor cleared his throat nervously. "We've hit a small snag," he said. "One of the board members is getting suspicious about the recent stock movements." The room fell silent. If word got out about their plan too soon, the stock price would skyrocket, making their takeover impossible. Maya thought quickly, remembering a lesson from her early startup days. Sometimes the best way to hide is in plain sight. "Let's leak a story," she suggested, a plan forming in her mind. "Something about a foreign investment group looking at American Airlines. It'll create enough noise to cover our movements." The strategy worked beautifully. By the next morning, several business news sites were running speculative stories about international investors eyeing struggling U.S. airlines. Regional Airways stocks saw increased trading volume, but nobody suspected that a young tech entrepreneur in a hoodie was behind it all. As their ownership percentage crept up, Maya's team began quietly preparing for the next phase. They developed plans for modernizing the booking system, redesigning crew uniforms, and implementing new training programs. Every detail was considered, right down to the color scheme for the new website. "We just passed 25%, Raj announced late one night. Maya was standing at her hotel window again, watching the planes take off. Each set of lights disappearing into the dark sky represented hundreds of passengers, each with their own story, their own dignity that deserved respect. She thought about Captain Stevens, probably still flying his routes, still judging people by their clothes, completely unaware that his world was about to change. But this wasn't about him anymore. It was about creating something better, something that would touch millions of lives. Before going to bed, Maya looked at the hoodie she'd worn on that fateful flight, now hanging in her hotel closet. She decided to wear it again the day she announced the takeover. Not as a symbol of revenge, but as a reminder that true worth comes from actions, not appearances. Her phone buzzed one last time. They'd reached 30% ownership. Soon, very soon, she would transform not just an airline, but an entire industry's understanding of respect, innovation, and human dignity. Maya fell asleep with a smile, knowing that the best part of her plan was still to come. The morning of the takeover began with chaos at Regional Airways headquarters. News had leaked that someone had acquired 51% of the company's shares. The lobby was packed with reporters, and phones were ringing nonstop in every office. In the executive boardroom, the airline's top management sat around a massive oak table, their faces pale with worry. Nobody knew who their mysterious new owner was. The CEO, Mr. Thompson, kept checking his phone, waiting for any information about who had just bought control of his company. "It must be one of the big international airlines," one board member suggested, loosening his tie nervously. "Or maybe one of those Middle Eastern investment funds." Another shook his head, pointing out that none of the usual suspects had shown any interest. Meanwhile, Maya was getting ready in her hotel room, deliberately putting on the same black hoodie from her flight. Her hands trembled slightly as she zipped it up, not from fear, but from excitement. Her phone buzzed with encouraging messages from her team, who had worked tirelessly to make this moment possible. The business news channels were going crazy. Breaking news. Mystery buyer takes control of Regional Airways, scrolled across screens in offices and airports across the country. Stock traders were frantically trying to figure out what was happening, and the airline's share price was swinging wildly. At exactly 10 a.m., Maya walked into Regional Airways headquarters. The security guard at the front desk barely glanced at her hoodie, assuming she was just another tech worker in the building. She smiled, thinking about how appearances could be so deceiving. The elevator ride to the top floor felt like it lasted forever. Maya used these moments to think about her grandmother, who had taught her that success wasn't just about making money. It was about making a difference. "You're doing this for everyone who's ever been judged unfairly," she whispered to herself. When she walked into the boardroom, the reaction was priceless. 20 pairs of eyes turned to stare at the young woman in casual clothes who had just interrupted their emergency meeting. Mr. Thompson stood up, looking annoyed. "Miss, this is a private meeting. How did you get in here?" Maya took a deep breath and smiled. "Actually, I believe I'm right where I need to be. I'm the one who bought your airline." She pulled out her phone and projected the ownership documents onto the boardroom screen. The silence that followed was deafening. Board members exchanged shocked glances. Someone dropped their pen, and the sound echoed through the room. Mr. Thompson's face went from red to white in seconds. But you're—" he stuttered, unable to finish his sentence. Maya completed it for him. "The new majority owner of Regional Airways. Yes, I am." She walked to the head of the table, her sneakers squeaking slightly on the polished floor. "And before anyone asks, yes, this is the same hoodie I wore when one of your pilots humiliated me in front of an entire first-class cabin last week." The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some looked down at their expensive suits, suddenly aware of how little clothing had to do with capability or worth. "But this isn't about revenge," Maya continued, her voice firm but kind. "This is about transformation, about bringing this airline into the modern age, about treating every passenger, every employee, with the respect they deserve." She pulled up a presentation showing her plans for the airline. New technology, better training, improved working conditions. The same board members who had been skeptical moments ago were now leaning forward, intrigued by her vision. As Maya outlined her plans for the future, she noticed Mrs. Kumar standing at the back of the room with other employee representatives who had been invited to the emergency meeting. The flight attendant's eyes were bright with tears of joy, and she gave Maya a subtle thumbs up. The morning that had started with chaos was ending with hope. Maya looked around the room, at the faces that had transformed from shocked to interested to excited. She knew this was just the beginning of a much bigger story, one that would change not just an airline, but the way people thought about judgment, respect, and the true meaning of first class. The first week after the takeover flew by in a blur of activity. Maya had moved her office into the heart of Regional Airways headquarters, not in the executive suite, but in an open space where employees could easily approach her. Her hoodie had become a symbol of the company's new direction, a reminder that excellence wasn't about appearances. One morning, she sat with the flight crew training department, listening to their ideas. A veteran flight attendant spoke up hesitantly. "For years, we've been asking for better training equipment. The simulators are so old that they don't match our newer planes." Maya typed notes on her laptop, nodding. "Show me," she said, standing up. The training facility tour was eye-opening. The equipment wasn't just old, it was ancient. Some of the training videos were still on VHS tapes. That afternoon, she called an all-hands meeting in the company cafeteria. Hundreds of employees packed in, from mechanics to office staff. "Starting tomorrow," Maya announced, "we're rebuilding our training program from the ground up. Every employee will have access to the latest technology and training tools." The room erupted in applause. In the back, she spotted Mrs. Kumar wiping away happy tears. But Maya wasn't done. "And that's just the beginning," she continued. "I want to hear from all of you. What needs to change? What would make your jobs better? What would help you serve our passengers better?" At first, people were shy about speaking up. They weren't used to being asked their opinions. But soon, ideas started flowing. A baggage handler suggested a new tracking system. A gate agent proposed better booking software. A maintenance worker pitched ideas for more efficient repair schedules. Maya had her team note down every suggestion. By the end of the day, they had filled 3 whiteboards with ideas. "This is how we build a better airline," she told her management team. From the ground up, listening to the people who know the job best. The changes began immediately. New booking systems were installed, making check-in faster and easier. Employee uniforms were redesigned for comfort and practicality, with input from the staff who would wear them. The old, rigid dress code was replaced with guidelines that focused on professionalism rather than appearances. But Maya hadn't forgotten about Captain Stevens. She'd been watching his flight records. He was still the same arrogant pilot who'd humiliated her. But firing him wasn't part of her plan. She had something better in mind. One day, she visited the pilot's briefing room before his flight. The other pilots fell silent as she walked in, all eyes on their new boss in her now famous hoodie. Captain Stevens stood at the back, his face unreadable. Starting next week, Maya announced, we're launching a new training program. Every crew member, from pilots to ground staff, will participate in workshops about respect, diversity, and customer service. She looked directly at Captain Stevens. Attendance is mandatory for all senior staff. The message was clear. This wasn't about punishment. It was about growth. About learning to see beyond surfaces and treating everyone with dignity. The changes were already showing results. Customer satisfaction scores were climbing. Employee morale was soaring. Social media was buzzing with positive stories about Regional Airways transformation. Late one evening, Maya walked through the quiet airport terminal, watching passengers board their flights. A little girl in a superhero costume ran past her, heading for the gate. The gate agent smiled at the child instead of making comments about proper airport attire. Back in her office, Maya looked at the framed photo on her desk, her grandmother standing proudly in front of her first grocery store. "We did it, Grandma," she whispered. "We showed them that real change comes from treating people right." Her phone buzzed with the latest customer feedback report. Complaints were down 60%. Employee applications had tripled. The airline industry was watching in amazement as Regional Airways transformed from a struggling carrier into a model of modern air travel. And it all started with a hoodie and the courage to turn humiliation into hope. The day of the company-wide meeting arrived with a buzz of excitement in the air. The largest conference center in the city was packed with Regional Airways employees. Flight crews in their new uniforms, maintenance staff, office workers, and executives all sitting together without the usual hierarchy. Captain Stevens sat in the front row, still carrying himself with the same air of superiority. He hadn't attended any of the new training sessions yet, always finding excuses about his flight schedule. Today's meeting was mandatory, though. No exceptions. The lights dimmed, and a hush fell over the crowd. On the massive screens, a video began playing. It showed passengers sharing their experiences with the airline's recent changes. A disabled traveler praised the new assistance program. An elderly couple thanked a flight attendant for extraordinary service. A young businessman talked about how the new booking app had made his life easier. Maya stood backstage, wearing that same black hoodie. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. She felt calm, ready. This wasn't about revenge. It was about teaching a lesson about respect that would last a lifetime. As she walked onto the stage, the spotlight followed her. Some employees who hadn't met her yet whispered in surprise at their CEO's casual appearance. In the front row, Captain Stevens' eyes widened with recognition. His face turned pale as the realization hit him. "Good morning, everyone," Maya began, her voice warm but firm. 3 months ago, I was a passenger on Flight 247 to San Francisco. She noticed Captain Stevens shifting uncomfortably in his seat. I was sitting in first class, wearing this exact hoodie. The room was silent now, hundreds of people leaning forward in their seats. A pilot on that flight decided I didn't belong there because of how I looked. She didn't need to point at Captain Stevens. Everyone knew who she meant. He made sure I, and everyone around me, knew his opinion. Maya walked across the stage, making eye contact with different sections of the audience. That day changed everything, not just for me, but for all of us. It showed me that an airline isn't just about getting from point A to point B. It's about how we treat each other along the way. She clicked a remote, and new images appeared on the screens. Charts showing customer satisfaction scores, employee happiness ratings, and stock prices, all trending upward dramatically. In 3 months, we've transformed regional airways, not through fancy marketing or cost cutting, but by remembering one simple truth. Every person deserves respect, regardless of what they're wearing or how they look. In the audience, Mrs. Kumar dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Other employees were nodding, some smiling, some crying quietly. Captain Stevens stared at the floor, his usual confidence completely gone. Maya continued, her voice getting stronger. Today, I'm announcing our new Respect First initiative. Every employee, from baggage handlers to pilots, she glanced at Captain Stevens, will go through comprehensive training about respect, diversity, and human dignity. Because true first class isn't about what you wear or how much you paid for your ticket. It's about how you treat people. The room erupted in applause. Even some of the old guard executives who had initially resisted the changes were standing and clapping. Captain Stevens remained seated, looking like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Maya raised her hand for quiet. But this isn't about singling anyone out or seeking revenge. It's about learning and growing together. Everyone deserves a chance to learn from their mistakes. Everyone deserves a chance to be better. She then shared stories of employees who had embraced the changes, who had gone above and beyond to make passengers feel welcome. With each story, the energy in the room grew stronger, more positive. As the meeting ended, employees stood in line to shake Maya's hand or share their own stories. Captain Stevens waited until the very end. When he finally approached her, his eyes were red. I owe you an apology," he stammered, looking at his polished shoes. "I was completely wrong, and I'm truly sorry." Maya looked at him thoughtfully. "Prove it," she said quietly. "Not to me, to every passenger you meet from now on. Show them what true first-class treatment really means." 6 months after the company-wide meeting, Regional Airways had become a different place entirely. The transformation was evident everywhere, from the warm smiles at check-in counters to the helpful ground staff assisting passengers with their bags. Captain Stevens had surprised everyone by becoming one of the strongest advocates for the new company culture. After completing his training, he asked to speak at the next batch of sessions. Standing before his fellow pilots, his voice shook as he shared his story. "I was that guy," he admitted to the room. "The one who thought he could judge people by their clothes. The one who thought he knew better than everyone else." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I was completely wrong." The changes went far beyond just attitudes. The new booking system Maya's tech team had implemented was being praised across the industry. Other airlines were trying to figure out how Regional had managed to reduce delays by 40% while increasing customer satisfaction to record levels. One sunny afternoon, Maya was walking through Terminal B when she overheard a conversation that made her stop. A young passenger in ripped jeans and a paint-stained t-shirt was apologizing to a gate agent about his appearance. He'd come straight from his art studio for an emergency flight. The gate agent smiled warmly. "Sir, we care about getting you to your destination safely and comfortably. Your clothes don't matter here." Maya couldn't help but smile. The message had truly sunk in. In the employee break room, a wall of photos showed the airline's journey. There was Maya in her famous hoodie, news clippings about the mysterious takeover, and pictures from various training sessions. But the most powerful images were the letters from passengers, sharing stories of exceptional service and kindness. Mrs. Kumar had been promoted to head of customer experience, bringing her years of genuine care and attention to a role where she could influence the entire airline. Her first initiative was a program ensuring that passengers with hidden disabilities received the support they needed without having to ask repeatedly. The business world had taken notice too. Industry magazines were writing about the regional revolution, how a struggling airline had transformed into an industry leader. The stock price had tripled, But Maya was most proud of another number. Employee satisfaction had reached 95%. Captain Stevens now ran the airline's pilot mentorship program. His office door was always open, and younger pilots often sought his advice. Remember, he'd tell them, our job isn't just flying planes. It's taking care of people. 1 year to the day after that fateful first-class flight, Maya stood in the same airport terminal where her story had begun. She watched as passengers of all kinds, business people in suits, students in hoodies, families in vacation wear, boarded their flights without judgment or discrimination. Her phone buzzed with a message from Raj. You need to see this. He'd sent a link to a viral social media post. A passenger had shared how Captain Stevens had gone out of his way to make a nervous first-time flyer feel comfortable, even giving the young student his own jacket when the cabin got cold. Maya's eyes welled up as she read the comments. Best airline ever. They treat everyone like first class. This is how all companies should be. The transformation had gone far beyond what she'd imagined. That evening, in her office overlooking the runway, Maya looked at her grandmother's photo again. Next to it now stood the framed hoodie, a reminder of where this journey had started. But this wasn't just her story anymore. It belonged to every employee who had embraced change, every passenger who had been treated with dignity. And yes, even to Captain Stevens, who had learned that true character has nothing to do with appearances. As the sun set behind the planes taking off into the orange sky, Maya thought about how one moment of humiliation had led to something so much bigger. A revolution in how people treat each other, not just in the air, but everywhere they went. Sometimes, she realized, the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's showing people a better way forward.